We all know Neil Armstrong as the first man to walk on the moon, but did you know that he was in line to fly Dyna-Soar? That's what we're talking about today on Vintage Space. The Dyna-Soar was a joint program between the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the NACA, which was NASA's predecessor, and the U.S. Air Force. The Dyna-Soar program built off the X-15 program, which was the first aircraft to fly hypersonically, albeit it was on the low end of hypersonics. The X-15's top speed is Mach 6.7, and hypersonic starts around Mach 5. But there was a secondary goal associated with this speed profile. Because it flew so much faster, the Dyna-Soar designed to reach speeds up to Mach 18 or Mach 20, it would experience much hotter temperatures when re-entering from the near orbital altitudes of its ballistic flight. And after following suborbital flights akin to the X-15's flight profile, Dyna-Soar was eventually designed to go into orbit. But of course, there was a human element to Dyna-Soar in that it was piloted and not a drone aircraft controlled by a computer. And because it was piloted, pilot safety had to be taken into consideration. The orbital versions of Dyna-Soar were designed to launch on a Titan II or Titan III booster, and that meant that mission planners had to figure out what would happen if that rocket exploded, because rockets had a bit of a tendency to explode in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And figuring out how to get a pilot away from an exploding rocket on the launch pad fell to Neil Armstrong. It didn't take Armstrong long to figure out that in its launch configuration, using a parachute to get out of Dyna-Soar wouldn't really help a pilot if disaster struck. Sitting on the launch pad, the pilot would be just 100 feet off the ground. So if he simply ejected from Dyna-Soar and used a parachute to get to safety, the parachute wouldn't have time to open before he would splat into the desert floor. He figured that the best thing to do was use Dyna-Soar's engine to shoot upward and away from an exploding rocket. Then at altitude, he could roll the aircraft over and glide it down to a runway landing a safe distance away from the launch pad. But before he could formally recommend it to the Air Force, he had to figure out some way of proving by proxy that the method would work. And so he turned to a Douglas Skylancer, modified so it had roughly the same aerodynamic qualities as the Dyna-Soar. He duplicated the placement and size of the launch pad and runway as they were at Cape Canaveral on the desert floor at Edwards Air Force Base. Then he flew the Skylancer in a straight line low over the desert floor until he hit the drawn-on launch pad. Once he was over the launch pad, he would pitch his nose up and fly in a steep vertical path, replicating the Dyna-Soar's flight away from an exploding rocket. At about 7,000 to 8,000 feet, roughly what he assumed the Dyna-Soar could reach with its own engine power, he would flip the vehicle over and glide to a runway landing. It worked, but Armstrong later said he was glad he never had to do it in a real Dyna-Soar. Not only did Armstrong leave the Air Force for NASA before the Dyna-Soar program could ever fly, it never flew. The program was canceled in December of 1963. So Dyna-Soar is my favorite program that never really came to be. What's your favorite program that never existed and why? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, leave those in the comments down below as well. Be sure to follow me on Twitter for vintage space content every single day of the week. And with new episodes going up every Tuesday and Friday, subscribe so you never miss an episode.